She didn't whisper his name. She said it clearly, proudly, while standing in the living room Ethan paid for. And the worst part? She didn't look guilty. She looked relieved. The city always sounded different from the 32nd floor. From up here, Manhattan wasn't chaos, it was rhythm, a steady hum of ambition, of people chasing something they couldn't quite name. Ethan Caldwell used to find comfort in that sound. It reminded him that he was part of something bigger. Now, it just made the silence inside his home louder. "Do you think we should post this tonight or tomorrow morning?" Claire asked, her voice light, almost distracted. Ethan looked up from his laptop. Claire stood near the window, her phone angled perfectly, capturing the skyline behind her. The golden hour light wrapped around her like it had been designed just for her. "You already took 3 versions," he said gently. "I think you've got it." She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she studied her reflection on the screen, adjusting a strand of hair, tilting her chin just slightly. "It's not about the picture," she said. "It's about timing." Ethan nodded, though he wasn't sure she was talking to him anymore. That had been happening more often lately, conversations that felt like monologues. Moments where he was physically present but emotionally optional. Still, he told himself it was normal. Claire's career had exploded over the past 2 years. Brand deals, speaking engagements, panel discussions about personal branding and digital identity. She was building something big, and he was proud of her. He had always been. "Dinner?" he asked. "I already ate," she replied, still scrolling through filters. "There was an event earlier, I told you." He paused. She hadn't, but he let it go. "Right," he said quietly. "Must have slipped my mind." Claire finally turned, offering a quick smile. "You've been working too much, Ethan." The irony almost made him laugh. "I could say the same to you." "It's different," she said, shrugging. "I love what I do." Ethan felt something shift in his chest, small, almost unnoticeable, like a crack forming beneath the surface. "I thought you loved what we built," he said, before he could stop himself. Claire's smile didn't disappear, but it changed, became polite. "Of course I do," she said. "Why would you even ask that?" He didn't have an answer. Or maybe he did, but he wasn't ready to say it out loud. Instead, he closed his laptop. "No reason." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The city hummed. Claire's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and something in her expression softened just slightly. A warmth Ethan hadn't seen directed at him in a long time. "Who is it?" he asked. "Work," she said quickly, locking the screen. Ethan nodded again. Work. Everything was work now. Later that night, as Claire slept beside him, her back turned, her breathing steady, Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He remembered a different version of this room, a smaller apartment, a broken heater. The winter they almost couldn't make rent. Claire had cried that night, her head on his chest. "I don't care if we're broke," she had whispered, "as long as we're together." He had believed her. God, he had believed her. Ethan turned his head slightly, watching her now. The same woman, the same face. But something was missing, or maybe something had been replaced. He reached out, hesitating for just a second before letting his hand rest lightly on her shoulder. Claire stirred. Then, almost instinctively, she shifted away. Not dramatically, not coldly, just enough. Just enough for him to feel it. Ethan pulled his hand back, and in that quiet, almost invisible moment, no words, no confrontation, something inside him began to fracture. Not break, not yet, but crack. The first time Ethan noticed it, he told himself it was nothing. Because it had to be nothing. Julian Brooks stood across the conference room table, sleeves rolled up just enough to suggest effort without sacrificing polish. He was explaining something, numbers, projections, risk mitigation, but Ethan wasn't really listening. He was watching Claire. She wasn't supposed to be there. Claire had insisted on attending the meeting just to observe, claiming she wanted to understand Ethan's world better. That alone should have meant something. Once, it would have meant everything. Now, it felt misaligned. Because she wasn't watching Ethan, she was watching Julian. Not obviously, not in a way anyone else in the room would question. But Ethan knew her, or at least he used to. It was in the way her attention lingered half a second too long. The way her lips curved, not into a polite smile, but something softer, more private when Julian made a point. And Julian noticed. Of course he did. He didn't react directly. He didn't cross any visible line. But there was a shift in his posture, a subtle awareness. Like a man who realizes the room has tilted slightly in his favor and chooses not to mention it. "Ethan?" Julian's voice pulled him back. "Sorry," Ethan said, straightening. "Go ahead." Julian nodded, continuing seamlessly, confident, composed. Exactly the kind of young man Ethan had once admired, the kind he had chosen. That thought landed heavier than expected. After the meeting, the others filtered out quickly. Calls to take, emails to answer, lives to resume. Ethan lingered, gathering his notes more slowly than necessary. Claire didn't move toward him. She moved toward Julian. That was impressive, she said, her tone light but sincere. Julian smiled. Coming from you, I'll take that as a win. Ethan watched the exchange, something tightening in his chest. You've got a good instinct for people, Claire added. The way you read the room, it's rare. Julian glanced at Ethan then, just briefly. I learned from the best. It was the right answer, the respectful answer. Ethan nodded, forcing a small smile. You're doing well, Julian. Thanks to you, Julian replied. But the moment didn't feel like gratitude. It felt like a transaction. They left the building together. Claire walked between them, her energy brighter than it had been in weeks. She talked more, laughed more small, effortless sounds that Ethan hadn't heard directed at him in a long time. You never told me your office had that view, she said, nudging Julian lightly. It's kind of unfair. Julian chuckled. Perks of being useful, I guess. You're more than useful, Claire said. Ethan's steps slowed, just slightly. It wasn't what she said, it was how easily she said it. Claire, Ethan interjected gently, we should probably... Oh, I'm actually grabbing a drink with Julian, she cut in, almost casually. Just to talk about some ideas. Branding stuff. Ethan blinked. Now? Yeah, she said, as if it were obvious. You've got work anyway, right? He did. There was always work. I could join you, he offered. For a fraction of a second, barely perceptible, Claire hesitated. Julian noticed it too, and then Claire smiled. It might be a bit boring for you. We'll just be talking shop. Shop. Ethan nodded slowly. Right, he said. Of course. Julian adjusted his jacket. We won't keep her long. The phrasing was careful, respectful, and somehow that made it worse. That night, Ethan sat alone in the penthouse. The city stretched endlessly beyond the glass, lights flickering like distant signals. His laptop sat open in front of him, an email half-written, cursor blinking patiently. He hadn't typed a word in 20 minutes. His phone buzzed. A notification. Claire had posted. He stared at the screen for a moment before opening it. A photo, dim lighting, 2 glasses on a table. The edge of a man's hand visible just enough to suggest presence, not enough to confirm identity. Caption: Conversations that challenge you are the ones worth having. Ethan exhaled slowly. It was harmless, ambiguous, strategic. Claire had always been good at that, saying just enough to invite curiosity, never enough to invite consequence. He locked the phone. This is nothing, he murmured to himself. Because it had to be. Because the alternative didn't make sense. Claire wasn't careless. She wasn't reckless. She didn't cross lines like that. Not her. Not the woman who had once sat beside him in a hospital hallway, gripping his hand as if letting go would break something permanent. You don't get to fall apart, she had whispered back then. Not when I need you. He had held on to that sentence like a promise, like proof. Ethan leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. People changed. That was normal. Pressure, success, new environments. It didn't mean betrayal. It didn't mean anything, right? The door opened just after midnight. Claire stepped inside quietly, heels in hand, moving with practiced ease. She paused when she saw him still awake. Oh, she said softly. You're up. Couldn't sleep, Ethan replied. She nodded, setting her shoes down. It ran late. I saw, he said, gesturing lightly toward his phone. Claire's expression didn't falter. It was productive. I'm sure it was. A beat of silence. Ethan studied her, really studied her. The faint flush in her cheeks, the looseness in her posture, the energy that hadn't quite faded. She looked alive, in a way she hadn't looked with him in months. How's Julian? He asked. The question hung between them, deceptively simple. Claire shrugged, walking past him toward the bedroom. He's good, driven, easy to talk to. Easy, Ethan swallowed. That's good, he said. Claire paused in the doorway, glancing back at him. You should spend more time with people like him, she added. Might do you some good. The words weren't harsh. They weren't even meant to hurt, but they landed anyway. Ethan nodded slowly. I'll keep that in mind. Claire disappeared into the bedroom. A moment later, the soft sound of a drawer opening, fabric shifting, the quiet rhythm of someone moving on with their night, without him. Ethan remained where he was, hands resting on the edge of the table. He tried to reconstruct the evening in his mind, the meeting, the smiles, the drink, the post. All of it, individually, meant nothing. Together, still nothing. It had to be nothing, because if it wasn't... He stopped the thought before it could finish. Instead, he stood, turned off the lights, and walked toward the bedroom. Claire was already in bed, facing away from him. Of course she was. Ethan lay down beside her, leaving just enough space not to touch, not to assume, not to expect. In the darkness, he stared ahead, listening to the quiet rhythm of her breathing. And for the first time, a question formed. Clear, sharp, and impossible to ignore. When did she start choosing someone else? Even when she was right here? He didn't ask it out loud, not yet, because asking would make it real, and Ethan wasn't ready for that. Not yet. The distance didn't happen all at once. It unfolded quietly like a room slowly losing oxygen, one breath at a time. At first, Ethan told himself it was temporary. Claire's calendar had become a living organism, constantly shifting, expanding, consuming. Brunch meetings that turned into afternoon panels. Brand calls that stretched into late-night strategy sessions. Flights booked on impulse, always last-minute opportunities. I have to be there, she would say, already halfway out the door. This is how it works now. And Ethan believed her. Because he wanted to. Because somewhere deep inside him there was still a version of Claire who needed him, not the world. One Sunday morning, Ethan woke to an empty bed. The sunlight filtered softly through the curtains, illuminating the untouched side where Claire should have been. Her pillow was cold, her scent faint, almost erased. He reached for his phone. No message, no explanation, just a new post from her account. A photo taken on a rooftop somewhere in Soho. Claire in a tailored blazer, sunglasses perched effortlessly, the skyline framing her like a statement. Caption: Becoming who you were always meant to be requires leaving behind what's comfortable. Ethan stared at the words longer than necessary. Something about them lingered. Not the message itself, but the implication. Leaving behind. He locked the phone. She's talking about growth, he muttered under his breath. Not us. The justification came automatically now, smooth, practiced, like muscle memory. Later that afternoon, he found himself standing in front of an old storage box in the back of their walk-in closet. He wasn't sure what had drawn him there. Maybe it was the silence. Or maybe it was the need to remember something that still made sense. He opened it carefully. Inside were fragments of a different life. Old photographs, movie stubs, a folded hospital bracelet. Ethan picked that one up slowly. Claire Caldwell, visitor emergency contact. The memory came back instantly. The sterile smell of the hospital room, the quiet beeping of machines, the weight of grief pressing against his ribs after his father passed. Claire had been there through all of it. She hadn't left his side for 3 days. I'm not going anywhere, she had whispered, her fingers intertwined with his. You don't have to be strong all the time. Not with me. Ethan closed his eyes, gripping the bracelet tighter. That was real. That wasn't an illusion. People didn't just become strangers overnight. There had to be a reason, a phase, something he could fix. You're overthinking it. The voice came from Marcus, Ethan's colleague, sitting across from him at a quiet bar near the office later that week. She's building her brand, Marcus continued, taking a sip of his drink. That world is intense, fast-paced. People get caught up in it. Ethan nodded, though his expression remained distant. And Julian? He asked. Marcus shrugged. Ambitious kid. Bit too smooth, if you ask me, but harmless. Harmless. Ethan repeated the word in his mind. It didn't quite fit. Claire talks about him a lot, Ethan said carefully. Of course she does. He's part of your world colliding with hers. That's normal. Normal. Everything was normal. That was the narrative. That was the safe version of reality. Ethan leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. Yeah, I guess. Marcus studied him for a moment. You trust her, don't you? The question was simple. Too simple. Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he thought about the hospital room, the promises, the years they had built something together from nothing. I do, he said finally, and he meant it, or at least he meant the version of her he was still holding on to. That night, Claire returned home earlier than usual. Ethan was in the kitchen cooking something simple, something familiar, the kind of meal he used to make when they didn't have much, when effort mattered more than presentation. Claire paused when she saw him. You're cooking? She asked, almost surprised. Thought we could eat together, he said, offering a small smile. It's been a while. She hesitated, just for a second. Then she set her bag down. Okay. They sat across from each other at the dining table. For a moment, it almost felt like before. The clink of utensils, the quiet rhythm of shared space. So, Ethan began, how was your day? Busy, Claire replied. Always is. He nodded. You've been really focused lately. That's what it takes, she said simply. Ethan studied her. And us? The question slipped out before he could soften it. Claire looked up, her expression unreadable. What about us? He stopped, choosing his words carefully. I feel like I don't see you anymore. Not really. Claire leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. I'm right here, Ethan. Physically, yes. A pause. Something shifted in the air. Claire's gaze hardened slightly, not anger, not quite, something more detached. I'm not going to apologize for growing, she said. I'm not asking you to, Ethan replied quickly. I just don't want to lose you in the process. You're not losing me, she said. But the way she said it, it sounded less like reassurance and more like a conclusion she had already accepted. Later, as they cleaned up in silence, Ethan reached for her hand. Just instinct, just habit. Claire didn't pull away immediately, but she didn't hold on either. Her fingers rested in his light, passive, almost absent. Ethan looked down at their hands, and suddenly a strange thought crossed his mind. This feels like holding on to a memory, not a person. He tightened his grip slightly. Claire gently slipped her hand free. I have a call, she said, already turning away. Of course she did. Ethan stood there for a moment, staring at the empty space where her hand had been. Then he nodded to himself. She's just under pressure, he whispered. That's all. Because love meant patience, didn't it? It meant understanding, endurance, belief. It meant staying, especially when things felt uncertain. That's what he had promised. That's what she had once promised, too. Ethan held on to that thought as he turned off the kitchen lights, held onto it like something fragile, like something that could still be saved, if he just didn't let go first. The truth didn't arrive like a storm. It slipped in quietly through gaps Ethan didn't realize had been left open. A notification, a missed call, a message that disappeared just a second too fast. Individually, they were nothing. Together, they formed something he couldn't quite name, but couldn't ignore anymore. It started with the phone. Claire had never been secretive before, careless even. She used to leave her phone unlocked on the kitchen counter, scroll through emails beside him, laugh at messages, and show him without hesitation. Now it was always face down, always within reach, always silent. One night, as they sat on opposite ends of the couch, him reviewing documents, her scrolling through something unseen, her phone lit up. Just for a second, but it was enough. Julian Brooks. Ethan didn't mean to see it, but he did. Claire picked up the phone almost immediately, her movements smooth, practiced. She didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge it. She just stood. I'm going to take this, she said, already walking toward the bedroom. The door didn't fully close. It never did. And through that small gap, Ethan heard something that stayed with him longer than any words could have. Her laugh. Soft, unfiltered, real. He hadn't heard that version of her in months. Later that night, she returned like nothing had happened. Sorry, she said, slipping back onto the couch. Work stuff. Ethan nodded slowly. What kind of work needs privacy? He asked, his tone light, too light. Claire glanced at him, just briefly. The kind you wouldn't understand. It wasn't meant to be cruel, but it wasn't kind either. Ethan forced a small smile. Try me. She didn't. Instead, she leaned back, eyes returning to her phone. It's just branding strategy, timing, messaging. It's complicated. I deal with complicated things every day, Claire. That's different. There it was again, that word, different. Everything about her life now seemed to exist in a category he didn't belong to. The late nights became routine. At first, she would text, running late, don't wait up, big opportunity tonight. Then the messages became shorter. Then they stopped altogether. Ethan stopped asking, not because he didn't care, but because every question felt like a step closer to something he wasn't ready to face. Julian, on the other hand, became impossible to avoid. He was everywhere. At the office, his presence had shifted. No longer just the eager protégé, he carried himself with a quiet certainty now, a confidence that bordered on ownership. In meetings, he spoke more, interrupted more, even challenged Ethan occasionally, not directly, but just enough to test the boundaries. And people noticed. They admired it. Kids got edge, someone had said after one meeting. Ethan didn't respond. He was too busy noticing something else. Julian didn't just look at him anymore. He looked through him. Then came the event. Claire had insisted Ethan attend a networking mixer hosted by one of her major partners. A rooftop venue, glass walls, city lights stretching endlessly beyond. You should be there, she had said. It matters. So he went. Of course he did. Ethan stood near the bar, scanning the room. Conversations overlapped. Laughter echoed. Glasses clinked in a carefully curated symphony of success. And then he saw them. Claire and Julian, standing too close, not touching, not crossing any obvious line, but existing in a space that felt exclusive, private. Julian said something Ethan couldn't hear, but Claire laughed. That same laugh, the one from behind the half-closed door. Ethan felt it again, that quiet tightening in his chest. He approached them slowly. Claire noticed him first. "Oh, Ethan," she said, her tone shifting almost imperceptibly. "There you are. There you are. Not, 'I was looking for you.' Not, 'I missed you.' Just recognition." Julian turned, offering a polite nod. "Good to see you." Ethan held his gaze a second longer than necessary. "You too." A pause. Not awkward. Not yet. Just waited. "We were just talking about a campaign idea," Claire said quickly. "Julian has some interesting insights." "I'm sure he does," Ethan replied. Julian smiled slightly. "We've been collaborating a bit. Cross-industry perspective." Collaborating. The word lingered. Ethan nodded. "Sounds productive." "It is," Claire said, again, too quickly, as if she needed him to believe it, or maybe as if she needed to believe it herself. The rest of the evening blurred. Faces, conversations, empty words. But one moment stayed clear, sharp, unavoidable. Ethan stepped outside onto the balcony, needing air. The city stretched below him, vast and indifferent. A few minutes later, voices followed. Claire's and Julian's. Ethan didn't turn. He didn't need to. "You worry too much," Julian was saying, his tone low, almost amused. "I don't," Claire replied. I don't want things to get messy." "They won't," Julian said. "Not if you stop overthinking it." A pause. Then, "You deserve more than comfortable." The word hit harder than it should have. Comfortable. Ethan closed his eyes. Inside, something shifted again. Not breaking, not yet, but bending further than it ever had before. When Claire returned home that night, Ethan was already in bed, awake, waiting. She slipped in quietly, careful not to disturb him, but he spoke anyway. "Are you happy?" The question cut through the darkness. Claire froze. "What kind of question is that?" she asked softly. "A simple one." A long pause. Ethan could hear her breathing, could feel the distance between them even lying inches apart. "I'm evolving," she said finally. Ethan stared into the darkness. That wasn't an answer. Or maybe it was, just not the one he wanted. He didn't press further, didn't ask about Julian, didn't mention the conversation on the balcony. Instead, he turned slightly, facing away from her, mirroring her, matching her distance. Because confronting it would make it real. And as long as it wasn't real, he could still fix it, right? But somewhere deep inside, beneath the denial, beneath the patience, beneath the quiet justifications, Ethan already knew. This wasn't just distance anymore. This was displacement. And someone else was slowly taking his place. The night was designed to impress. Everything about it. The lighting, soft, golden, curated to flatter every angle. The music, low enough to allow conversation, high enough to fill silence. The guest list, carefully selected names that carried weight in rooms that mattered. Claire had orchestrated all of it. "Tonight is important," she had said that morning, standing in front of the mirror, adjusting a pair of diamond earrings Ethan didn't remember buying. "There are people here who can change everything." Ethan had nodded. He didn't ask what everything meant anymore. By 8 o'clock, the penthouse was full. Voices layered over one another. Laughter drifted from the living room to the balcony. Champagne glasses caught the light like tiny mirrors reflecting curated success. Ethan moved through the crowd like a guest, not a host, not a husband, just present. People greeted him, of course. They always did. Respectful nods, polite admiration. "You must be proud of Claire," someone said. Ethan smiled. "I am." And he meant it. That was the tragedy of it. Claire, meanwhile, was everywhere, effortless, magnetic, alive. She moved from group to group with practiced ease, her hand occasionally brushing someone's arm, her laughter perfectly timed, her presence undeniable. But she never came to him. Not once. Ethan noticed. Of course he did. But he told himself it was the event, the pressure, the expectations. Always a reason, always a way to delay the truth. It happened just after 9. Subtle at first, a shift in the room. Not loud, not obvious. but enough to pull attention in one direction. The elevator doors opened, and Julian Brooks stepped inside. Ethan felt it before he saw it. The energy changed, like a current running through the space, quiet, electric, undeniable. Julian didn't rush. He didn't need to. He walked in like he belonged there, like he had been invited into something personal. Claire saw him immediately. Of course she did. And for a moment, just a moment, everything else in the room faded from her focus. Ethan watched it happen. That look, that subtle, unguarded warmth. It wasn't meant for the crowd. It wasn't part of the performance. It was real. And it wasn't for him. She moved toward Julian, not quickly, not dramatically, just naturally, as if that's where she was always meant to be. Ethan stayed where he was. He didn't follow, he didn't interrupt, he just watched. Because something inside him, something quiet but certain, told him this moment mattered. Claire reached Julian and smiled. Not the curated smile, not the public one. This one was softer, closer. "I wasn't sure you'd make it," she said. "I wouldn't miss it," Julian replied. Simple, direct, too easy. Someone nearby turned, noticing them, then another, and another. Attention gathered not because of anything obvious, but because something about them drew it in. Claire glanced around briefly. Then, without hesitation, she placed her hand lightly on Julian's arm. The gesture was small, but it was enough. "Everyone," she said, her voice lifting just enough to cut through the noise. The room quieted. Ethan felt his chest tighten. Not in panic, not yet, just awareness. Something was about to happen. Claire smiled, her gaze sweeping across the guests. "I want you to meet someone important to me." Ethan didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't look away. "This is Julian." A pause. Then, "My partner." The word didn't explode. It didn't echo. It simply landed. Heavy. Irreversible. For a second, no one reacted, because no one understood. Not immediately. Because Ethan was standing right there. Because this didn't make sense. Because it couldn't. Claire continued, as if filling the silence. "He's been instrumental in a lot of what I've been building lately," she said. "Honestly, none of this would feel as real without him." Ethan felt something inside him go still. Not break, not shatter, just stop. Someone shifted uncomfortably. A glass clinked too loudly. The room didn't know where to look, so it looked at Ethan. Claire followed their gaze. And for the first time that night, she looked at him. Really looked. Not past him, not through him, at him. There was no guilt in her eyes, no hesitation, just distance. Cold, quiet, final. "I think," she said slowly, "we've both outgrown what this used to be." The words were calm, measured, delivered like a conclusion she had rehearsed. Ethan didn't speak. He couldn't. Not because he was weak, but because something far more dangerous had taken hold. Clarity. Claire stepped closer to Julian, not hiding it, not softening it, owning it. "Julian challenges me," she continued. "He sees me for who I am now, not who I used to be." A beat. Then, "You were always safe, Ethan." The word again. Safe. Her head tilted slightly, almost thoughtful. Comfortable. Another pause. And then the line that changed everything. "But you were never enough." The room didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't exist. Not anymore. Because in that moment, Ethan understood something with absolute, devastating clarity. This wasn't about betrayal, not really. It was about disrespect. Complete, unfiltered, public. And suddenly, all the justifications, all the patience, all the memories he had clung to like anchors, they lost their weight. Claire was still speaking, explaining, framing it as growth, as evolution, as something inevitable. But Ethan wasn't listening anymore. He looked at her, really looked. And for the first time, he didn't see his wife. He saw a stranger, wearing her face, speaking with her voice, but completely disconnected from the person he had loved. And then it happened. Not a shout, not a confrontation, not a dramatic exit. Just a moment, quiet, almost invisible. Claire's eyes flickered toward him again, just briefly. And Ethan didn't react. No anger, no pain, no questions, nothing. That was the moment. The exact second something inside him let go. Without a word, Ethan reached for his glass, set it down, adjusted his sleeve, and walked away. Not rushed, not defeated, just done. Behind him, the room slowly came back to life. Whispers, confusion, shock. Claire's voice again quieter now, less certain. But Ethan didn't turn back. Because the man who would have stayed, who would have fought, who would have begged for answers, he didn't exist anymore. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt something unfamiliar. Not pain, not relief, something colder, something cleaner. Freedom. The silence didn't follow Ethan home. It arrived before him. By the time he stepped out of the elevator, the penthouse already felt different. Not empty, not broken, just stripped. Like a stage after the performance, lights still on, props still in place, but the illusion gone. Ethan loosened his tie as he walked in. The faint scent of perfume lingered in the air, Claire's, mixed with something sharper, unfamiliar. Voices drifted from the living room, muted, careful. He paused for half a second, then stepped forward. Claire was standing near the window. Julian was gone. Of course he was. This wasn't his mess to stay in. Claire turned slightly when she heard Ethan, but not fully, not enough to face him. That detail mattered more than anything she could have said. "You left," she said. Her tone wasn't accusatory. It wasn't emotional. It was observational, like she was noting a fact. Ethan set his keys down on the table. Yes. A pause. The city hummed outside. Inside, the air felt still, dense. "You didn't say anything," Claire added. Ethan looked at her, really looked. There were no tears in her eyes, no regret, no visible trace of what had just happened. Only a kind of quiet composure. Curated, maintained. "I didn't think it required a response," he said. Claire shifted slightly, crossing her arms, not defensively, but out of habit. A gesture that filled space where emotion should have been. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that," she said. Ethan tilted his head just slightly. "How was it supposed to happen?" Another pause. Claire exhaled, glancing toward the window. "I was going to tell you," she said, "just not like this. Not like this." Ethan let the words settle. "You mean not in front of people," he said. Claire didn't answer, because she didn't need to. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Not for Ethan, not anymore. A few days ago, hours ago, this moment would have broken him. He would have demanded answers, asked questions he didn't really want the answers to, held on to something, anything that resembled hope. But now, there was nothing left to hold. "I want to understand," Ethan said. His voice was calm, too calm. Claire glanced at him again, this time longer. "Understand what?" "How long?" he said. The question was direct, no hesitation, no cushioning. Claire's lips pressed together slightly. "It doesn't matter. It matters to me." Another pause. Then, "A few months." The words landed softly, but they echoed. Ethan nodded once, processing, not reacting. "While you were still here," he said. Claire frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means," Ethan replied, "you were already gone." The statement wasn't bitter, just precise. Claire shifted again, this time more noticeably. "I didn't plan it," she said. "It just happened." Ethan almost smiled, not because it was funny, because it was predictable. "That's usually how people explain things they chose," he said. Claire's jaw tightened slightly. "You think this was easy for me?" Ethan considered the question, then shook his head. "No," he said. "I think it was easy enough." Another silence. He could feel it now, not the absence of sound, but the absence of something else. Connection, recognition. Whatever had once existed between them, it wasn't here anymore. Claire walked past him, heading toward the kitchen. "I didn't do this to hurt you," she said. Ethan turned his head slightly, watching her. "I believe you." And he did. That was the problem. She poured herself a glass of water, her movements steady, controlled. "You and I," she began, then stopped. Ethan waited, but she didn't finish. Instead, she took a sip, eyes fixed on the counter, avoiding him. And that's when it happened. Not when she confessed, not when she explained, not even when she stood beside another man in front of a room full of people. It happened now, in this quiet, almost invisible moment. Claire didn't look at him. Not once. Not fully. And Ethan realized. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't shame. It was absence. The woman who used to search his face for reassurance, who used to hold his gaze like it meant something. She was gone. Completely. Ethan felt it then, not as a sharp pain, but as something slower, deeper, final. A recognition. She is no longer the person I loved. Not changed, not distant, not confused. Gone. And in her place was someone who could stand in the same room as him after everything and feel nothing strong enough to even meet his eyes. Ethan looked away first, not because he couldn't hold her gaze, but because there was nothing left to find in it. "Are you staying tonight?" Claire asked quietly. The question came late. Too late. Ethan picked up his jacket. "Yes," he said. A pause. Then he added, "But not for the reason you think." Claire frowned slightly but didn't ask. For once, she didn't push. Ethan walked past her toward the hallway, then stopped, just for a second. "I meant what I said," he said without turning back. "I wanted to understand." Claire didn't respond. "And now I do." He continued walking. Behind him, Claire stood still, silent, uncertain. For the first time, not in control. And for the first time, Ethan didn't feel the need to fix it, didn't feel the need to reach for her, to explain, to stay. Because something inside him had already made the decision. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of clarity. And clarity was far more dangerous. Ethan didn't leave the next morning, not immediately. That would have been expected, predictable, emotional. And Ethan was no longer operating from emotion. He woke before Claire, as he always did. The city outside was still in that rare, fragile state between night and morning quiet, almost honest. For a moment he lay there, staring at the ceiling, not thinking about her, not replaying the night, just still. Then he got up, showered, dressed, made coffee. Routine, structure, control. Claire appeared in the kitchen 20 minutes later. She looked different in the daylight. Not softer, just less certain. "Morning," she said carefully. Ethan glanced at her, then back to his phone. Morning. No hostility, no warmth, just acknowledgement. That unsettled her more than anger would have. "Are you going to the office?" she asked. "Yes." A pause. "I might come by later," she added. "I have a meeting nearby." Ethan nodded once. "Do what you need to do." The words were neutral, but something about them closed the door. Claire watched him for a second longer, waiting. For what, she wasn't sure. A reaction, a question, anything. But it didn't come. "Ethan," she said. He looked up, and for a brief moment their eyes met. There was something in hers now, not guilt, not fully, but the beginning of something unstable, uncertainty. "About last night." "You don't need to explain it again," Ethan said calmly. I understand." He held her gaze just long enough for the words to land, then looked away. Conversation over. Claire swallowed whatever she was about to say, because for the first time, she felt it. The shift. Ethan wasn't trying to understand anymore. He already had. And that made him unreachable. At the office, Ethan moved differently. Not slower, not distracted. Sharper. Julian noticed it immediately. Of course he did. People like him always notice shifts in power. During the morning briefing, Julian spoke with his usual confidence, laying out projections, suggesting strategies, subtly positioning himself as indispensable. Ethan led him, listened, observed. There was a time when Ethan would have guided him, corrected him, protected him. That time was over. "Interesting approach," Ethan said when Julian finished. Julian smiled slightly. "I thought you'd see the value." "I do," Ethan replied, "especially the parts you didn't disclose." The room stilled, just slightly. Julian's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. "I'm not sure what you mean." Ethan leaned back in his chair, calm, measured. "Then we'll go over it in detail," he said, privately. The message was clear. Not a threat, a promise. Julian nodded once. "Of course." Across the table, a few colleagues exchanged glances. Something had shifted. They didn't know what, but they felt it. Ethan wasn't the same man who had walked into that room a week ago. And Julian was no longer entirely comfortable. That afternoon, Ethan sat alone in his office, the blinds half closed. The city filtered into lines of light and shadow across his desk. On the screen in front of him, emails, financial records, internal reports, patterns, small inconsistencies, unusual approvals, connections that shouldn't exist. Julian had been careful, but not careful enough. Ethan wasn't looking for revenge. That's what he told himself. He was looking for truth, and truth had a way of dismantling everything built on illusion. Meanwhile, Claire was unraveling. It didn't happen all at once, just like everything else. At first, being with Julian felt like confirmation, validation, freedom. He was attentive, engaging, exciting. Everything Ethan had stopped being. Or at least, everything she had convinced herself he had stopped being. But slowly, something began to shift. Julian's attention wasn't constant. It came in waves, strong, intense. Then, gone. He canceled plans, delayed replies, turned conversations back to himself. "You're overthinking," he said one evening, barely looking up from his phone. Claire frowned. "I just asked if we're still on for tonight. I said I'd let you know." "That's not an answer." Julian sighed, leaning back. "You're starting to sound demanding." The word hit her harder than she expected. "Demanding? I just want clarity," she said. Julian smirked slightly. "You had clarity before, didn't seem to make you happy." Claire went quiet, because for a second, she didn't know how to respond. Later that night, she returned to the penthouse. Ethan was there, working, as usual. The familiarity of it felt strange, unsettling. "You're still here," she said. It wasn't a question. Ethan didn't look up. "Yes." Claire stood there for a moment. "Then I thought you might have left." Ethan paused, just briefly, then continued typing. "I will," he said. "Not if, not maybe. Will." The certainty in his voice sent something cold through her chest. "For good?" she asked. Ethan finally looked at her, and for the first time, there was no trace of the man who used to hesitate, used to hope, used to stay. "Yes." Claire's throat tightened slightly. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She had expected conflict, emotion, resistance, not this, not detachment. "You're just going to walk away?" she asked. Ethan studied her, not with anger, not with pain, with clarity. "I'm not walking away," he said. "I'm stepping out of something that no longer exists." The words landed heavier than anything he had said before. Claire opened her mouth, closed it again, because suddenly she felt it. Not control, not certainty. Loss. Real. Immediate. Irreversible. And somewhere, deep beneath everything she had built, a thought began to form. What if he doesn't come back? Ethan turned back to his work, conversation over. But this time, Claire didn't move. She stood there, watching him, as if trying to find something familiar, something she could still hold on to. But there was nothing left, because while she had been choosing someone else, Ethan had been choosing himself. And now, it was too late to undo either decision. The invitation arrived 3 days later. A corporate summit, high profile, invitation only. Investors, partners, media. The kind of room where reputations were built or erased. Claire saw it first. "You're going?" she asked, holding the embossed envelope in her hand. Ethan didn't look up from his watch as he adjusted the strap. "Yes." A pause. "They invited me too," she said. "I know." That was it. No follow-up, no reaction. Claire hesitated. For a moment, she almost asked, "Are we going together?" But something stopped her, because she already knew the answer. That night, the city felt colder. Or maybe it was just her. The venue was everything it was meant to be. Glass, steel, precision. A reflection of power and control. People moved with intention, every word measured, every smile strategic. Ethan fit into that world effortlessly, as if he had never left it. Claire arrived 20 minutes later, alone. She scanned the room, her breath catching slightly when she found him. Ethan stood near the center, speaking with a small group, composed, focused, unshaken, untouched. For a second, she saw him the way she used to, the man who had built everything from nothing, the man who had stood beside her when she had no one, the man she had called home. And then she saw what she had done. Julian arrived shortly after, confident, polished, unaware. He found Claire easily, slipping into place beside her like it was natural. "You look tense," he said lightly. "I'm fine." He studied her for a second, then shrugged. "Relax, it's just another room." But it wasn't. Not tonight. At precisely 9:15, the host stepped onto the stage. Introductions, formalities. Then, before we move forward, one of our senior partners has requested a moment to address the room. A slight shift in energy. Curiosity. Ethan stepped forward. Claire felt it instantly. Her chest tightened. "Julian," she whispered, but he didn't respond, because his attention was already locked on Ethan. Ethan took the microphone calmly. No rush, no hesitation. "Good evening," he began. His voice carried easily, steady, controlled. "I won't take much of your time." A few polite smiles, nods. Ethan glanced briefly across the room. His eyes passed over Claire. Didn't stop. That hurt more than anything. "This is a room built on trust," Ethan continued, "on partnerships, on the assumption that the people we work with operate with integrity." A subtle shift. The tone had changed. Julian straightened slightly, just slightly. "And when that trust is misplaced," Ethan added, "it doesn't just affect individuals, it compromises everything." Claire's pulse quickened. "Over the past few weeks," Ethan said, "I've come across a series of inconsistencies. Financial discrepancies, unauthorized approvals, conflicts of interest." A murmur rippled through the room. Julian's jaw tightened. "Ethan," he started, low. But Ethan didn't stop. "I gave someone the benefit of the doubt," he said. "I assumed potential. I invested time. Trust." A beat. Then, "That was a mistake." The words landed hard. Ethan nodded toward the screen behind him. A presentation appeared. Emails, transactions, signatures, patterns. Clear, undeniable. Julian stepped forward. "This is out of context," he said, louder now. "You're misrepresenting." "I'm documenting," Ethan replied calmly. The room was no longer polite. It was watching. Julian's confidence cracked, just slightly, then more. "This isn't the place for this," he snapped. "No," Ethan said, "this is exactly the place. Because this wasn't just exposure, it was precision. Everything Julian had built unraveled in minutes." Security moved in quietly, not aggressively, but decisively. Julian looked around, for support, for defense, for anything. He found none. His gaze finally landed on Claire, and for the first time, there was no charm left, no control, only calculation. "How much did he know?" Julian asked her under his breath. Claire couldn't answer, because she didn't know either. Ethan had never raised his voice, never confronted, never warned. He had just watched and acted. Julian was escorted out, not dramatically, but completely. Gone, just like that. The room buzzed. Whispers, speculation, damage control. Claire stood frozen, because now everyone was looking at her, not with admiration, not with curiosity, with judgment. She stepped back, then turned, and walked out. The penthouse was dark when she returned, too quiet, too still. "Ethan?" she called. No answer. She moved through the space slowly. Something felt off. The closet, half empty. The office, cleared. The drawer, open. Inside, a single envelope. Her name. Claire's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside, no long letter, no emotional goodbye. Just one line. "I stayed longer than I should have. I'm leaving exactly when I need to. Ethan." Claire sank onto the edge of the bed. The weight hit her all at once. Julian, gone. Her reputation, fractured. And Ethan wasn't coming back. Not physically, not emotionally, not in any way that mattered. Weeks passed. Claire tried to reach him. Calls, messages, silence. Not blocked, not rejected, just unanswered. Which was worse, because it meant he saw them and chose not to respond. The final moment came unexpectedly. A quiet afternoon, a cafe across the street from a building she used to walk into with confidence. Claire saw him through the window. Ethan, sitting alone, calm, focused, whole. For a second she couldn't breathe. Then she stood, walked in. He looked up as she approached. Their eyes met, and in that moment Claire realized something that broke her more than anything else. He wasn't angry. He wasn't hurt. He wasn't anything, just indifferent. "Ethan," she said, her voice barely holding. He nodded politely. "Claire." No warmth, no history, nothing. I didn't know where else to go, she said. Ethan waited, not impatiently, not kindly, just neutrally. I made a mistake, she said. It wasn't just a mistake, Ethan replied calmly. It was a series of choices. Tears filled her eyes. I lost everything, she whispered. Ethan studied her for a moment, then said the one thing she would carry for the rest of her life. You lost me long before that. Silence. I thought, she started, I thought you'd fight for us. Ethan's expression didn't change. I did, he said, for longer than you respected me for it. The words didn't hit like anger, they hit like truth. Final. Claire broke then, not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. Because she understood now. The affair wasn't what destroyed them. It was the moment she believed he would never leave, and stopped valuing him because of it. Ethan stood, placed money on the table, paused for half a second. Not for her, for himself. Then walked away. And this time, Claire didn't follow, because she knew there was nothing left to reach, nothing left to fix, nothing left at all. Outside, the city moved on, unchanged, unaffected. But for Claire, everything had already ended. And for Ethan, everything had finally begun.